They didn't tell you about North Brother Island for a reason, because if you knew what happened there, you'd never trust a white coat again. In the time it takes you to blink, a man disappeared. No headline, no body, just a form signed in a back office, and a ferry ride that didn't bring him back. North Brother Island sits in the East River, rotting behind a veil of vines and silence, but it didn't used to be quiet. It screamed, hospitals are supposed to heal, but this one wasn't built to save. It was built to erase. Between 1885 and 1963, it became a dumping ground for the sick, the strange, the unwanted, typhoid carriers, tuberculosis patients, heroin addicts, orphans, political problems disguised as medical cases. But listen carefully. The disease was never the target. Control was. You see, when a government wants to eliminate a threat quietly, they don't use bullets. They use institutions. They change the definition of illness. Then they build a place to hide the cure. That place was North Brother Island. They called it quarantine, but it was custody. They said it was for public safety, but it was for obedience. You don't need iron bars. When people believe they're being helped, and when they stop believing, you strap them to the bed, inject the silence, and call it mercy. There are no documentaries about what really happened here. No field trips, no plaques, only ruins. Guarded ruins. Why guard a dead place? Because what's buried there isn't dead. The files were burned, the names erased, the cameras banned. But the ghosts, they remember, and now so will you. This is the story of the hospital that was never meant to heal, the island that swallowed the forgotten, and the system that still exists, just with better lighting and nicer words. Don't just watch, listen, because what you're about to hear isn't a story. It's a warning. And once you know, you can't unknow. The city called it Riverside Hospital, but nothing about it flowed, nothing about it healed. It sat alone on an island, surrounded by water too cold to cross, and stories too dangerous to tell. They said it was a medical facility, but when the first patients arrived, there were no doctors with warm hands, no stethoscopes, only locked doors, iron bed frames, and guards who didn't ask questions. They didn't come to help you. They came to keep you in. New York was exploding with disease, typhoid, tuberculosis, smallpox. But it wasn't just about health. It was about class, about race, about who mattered and who didn't. The rich didn't want to see sickness, didn't want to hear coughing in the alleys, or step over bodies on their way to work. So the city created distance. They needed somewhere to send the infected, the poor, the inconvenient. And there it was. North Brother Island, uninhabited, invisible, and just far enough away to be forgotten. They told the public it was compassion, but the blueprints said otherwise. Thick walls, steel shutters, one ferry in, no way out. If your neighbor saw you sweat, if your boss said you looked pale, you could be gone by sundown. No trial, no doctor's second opinion, just one signature. And a vanishing. People weren't admitted. They were disappeared. You were labeled contagious, unfit, non-compliant. You were treated like a threat, even if all you had was a cough or an accent. And once that gate closed behind you, the world outside didn't ask what happened next, because not asking was safer. Inside, time dissolved, rights were suggestions, and your name faded into a file that no one ever planned to open again. This wasn't public health. It was population control, wrapped in medical terms, disguised as care. And the scariest part, most people never questioned it, because when fear controls the narrative, authority doesn't need to ask for permission. It just writes you off. One ferry ride at a time. Her name was Mary Mallon, but history remembers her as something else. Typhoid Mary, the most feared woman in America, and she didn't even know why. She was a cook, an immigrant. She didn't cough, didn't shake. She looked healthy. But death followed where she worked. Homes fell silent, families destroyed, bodies piling in patterns the city could no longer ignore. They traced the trail, and it led back to her hands. Her food, her smile. Mary didn't believe them. She never got sick. She thought they were lying, blaming the poor, blaming the foreign. So she ran. And when they caught her, she fought, kicking, biting, screaming. They dragged her to North Brother Island, told her it was quarantine, said it was temporary. They gave her a cottage, but a cage with curtains. Is still a cage. She wrote letters, pleaded, begged them to test her again. But once the system labels you, you're not a person anymore. You're protocol. Mary lived there for decades, alone, surrounded by the infected, the forgotten, the silenced. She died in 1938. Still convinced she was innocent, still behind the fences. And after her death, something changed. She became the template. Now they didn't need symptoms, didn't need proof. Suspicion was enough. Wrong name, wrong skin, wrong neighborhood. You'd wake up in your bed and fall asleep behind locked doors. And the public? They clapped, because fear makes obedience look noble. But behind the walls, North Brother wasn't treating disease. It was testing compliance. How much silence can a human soul survive? How long can someone beg to be heard before they forget the sound of their own voice? Mary's ghost still walks the island. That's what they say. In the halls, in the windows, still trying to leave. But she's not just haunting the buildings. She's haunting the blueprint. Because the system that caged her never died. It just changed its name. After Mary was locked away, the rules stopped pretending to be rules. Now anyone could vanish. A cough on the subway, a whisper from a neighbor, wrong accent, wrong income, wrong timing. And you were gone. No lawyer, no family visit, just one ride across the East River. And the island took you in. Inside Riverside, there were no clocks, no choices, just corridors that echoed, with the kind of silence that breaks bones. Life wasn't life. It was waiting, waiting to be cleared, waiting for your file to be seen, waiting for someone to remember you ever existed. But no one came. Because outside the gates, the city told a different story. They said you were getting help, said you were receiving care. They didn't mention the straps, the syringes. The meals slid through a slot in the door. They didn't show the windows nailed shut or the letters marked undeliverable. Inside, you weren't recovering. You were erasing. Each day, a little more of you gone, until even your name didn't sound like yours anymore. The nurses didn't speak. They patrolled, clipboard keys, shoes that didn't echo, and eyes that never made contact. This wasn't a hospital. It was a mechanism, a machine designed to make people vanish. In plain sight, with no blood, no violence, just bureaucracy. If you asked too many questions, you got moved to the quiet ward. If you cried, they gave you something for that too. Compliance was the only treatment, and when you died, if you died, they told your family it was natural causes. And if your family asked too much, they stopped answering the phone. This was never about healing. It was about management, damage control, an island turned algorithm, built to remove problems without making noise. And the scariest part, it worked, because the people stopped asking. And when you stop asking, you stop knowing. And when you stop knowing, you're next. They say the ferry was reliable. Until it wasn't. One morning in 1902, a small hospital boat left Manhattan. A nurse, 2 attendants, a boy with scarlet fever. Routine. Predictable. expected. But it never came back. The river was calm. The sky was clear. But something went wrong. The next day, fishermen found the vessel drifting near Hellgate. No crew, no passengers, no damage. Just floating, as if nothing had ever been inside. The ship's log was gone. The medical files missing. The names erased. And the city's explanation. Weather, as if fog could make 4 bodies vanish, without a trace. After that, they doubled security, armed guards, stricter protocols, fewer questions, because it wasn't the first time something disappeared, and it wouldn't be the last. You see, rivers carry more than water. They carry secrets. If you know where to look, or where not to. People who worked at North Brothers started to whisper about doors that opened into brick, hallways that led nowhere, rooms that weren't on the blueprints. One janitor said he found a basement full of broken stretchers and restraints. He reported it. The next week he was gone. Transferred, that's what they said. But no one ever found out where. And then there was the Slocum. June 15, 1904. The day the river caught fire, a steamboat, packed with mothers and children, churchgoers on a Sunday outing. It caught fire midstream. Flames swallowed the decks. The life vests turned to powder. Bodies leapt into the water, screaming, burning, drowning. The boat drifted to one place. North Brother Island, survivors said they saw people watching from the windows, said they knocked, begged, screamed. But no one opened the doors. Some say the staff were ordered to stay inside, to keep the patients secure, even as children burned outside, because the mission wasn't to save, it was to contain, even if the world around them collapsed in smoke. By the time the fires faded and the newspapers moved on, North Brother Island returned to silence. But inside, something had shifted. They stopped calling it quarantine, stopped pretending it was about medicine. Now it was just Riverside, a name clean enough to forget. But what happened behind those locked gates wasn't clean, wasn't orderly, wasn't humane. Patients were no longer people. They were case numbers, test subjects, threats to be managed. A girl came in with pneumonia, dead in 3 weeks, cause of death, heart failure. A man with a broken arm, strapped to a bed. He stopped breathing in his sleep. An old woman who simply fainted at a bakery, vanished within days. No one ever claimed her body. The files didn't add up. The timelines didn't make sense. Discharge dates were blank. Medical notes stopped mid-sentence. And when families came looking, they were told the patient had never arrived. Ask too many questions. You get silence. Push harder. You get a knock at your door. Even the staff weren't safe. A nurse named Alice Lang filed a report. She said patients were being sedated without consent, said she witnessed restraints used on children. She mailed a letter to the mayor. No response. 2 weeks later, she was transferred. A month later, she disappeared. Another staffer tried to go to the press. He drowned. Calm waters, no witnesses, no life jacket. An accident, they said. North Brother didn't like noise. It preferred obedience. So the records were edited, the logs rewritten, and the people left behind were just ghosts in waiting. But some things you can't bury. The floors still held footprints, the walls still echoed names, and the beds still had straps. This wasn't an institution, it was a blueprint, a model for how to disappear people, without bullets, without blood, without blame. And the scariest part, it looked like help. It sounded like safety. That's how they hide the knife, in the promise of care. They wore white coats, but they didn't heal. By the 1920s, North Brother Island wasn't staffed by physicians. It was managed by enforcers. The charts were weapons, the pills were punishment, and the treatments were tests. Ice baths for disobedience, forced sedation for crying, solitary confinement called therapy. They had a ward called the freezer, another simply called the hole. There were no names on the doors, just numbers, just silence, and just enough suffering to remind you that escape was a fantasy. One patient, a teenage girl, was restrained for 72 hours for refusing a second injection. She died from a seizure. The file listed non-compliant behavior. That word, non-compliant, it justified everything. Pain wasn't a side effect. It was the design. And those who resisted vanished faster. Letters went missing. Phone calls blocked. Visitation rights revoked. Paper trails shredded. They told the public this was necessary to prevent outbreaks, to protect the healthy, but the only thing contagious was the power you give an institution permission to cage one kind of person. It learns how to cage every kind. Soon, the patients weren't just sick. They were inconvenient, loud, uncooperative, unwanted. That's the word the files used, unwanted. And when something is unwanted, you don't fix it, you bury it. The screams became background noise. The straps became routine, and the doctors stopped seeing people. They saw problems, to be handled, logged, forgotten. This wasn't about saving lives. It was about learning how to remove them, quietly, efficiently, officially. And once they perfected it, they didn't stop. Because control, once learned, is never unlearned. They didn't close the book on North Brother. They just rewrote it, changed the cover, changed the name. But the script, the method, the silence, that stayed the same. In the 1930s, New York changed the kind of people it sent to North Brother Island. They weren't contagious. They weren't violent. They weren't even sick. They were children, orphans, too defiant, too poor, too black, too strange. The city called it protective custody, said it was better than the streets, said the island was safer. But the buildings told a different story. There were no teachers, no classes, no playgrounds, just metal doors, observation windows, and silence. Some were given uniforms, some were drugged, some were used for something else. They called it resilience testing, a clean name for cruelty with a clipboard. One child, Polly, age 9, built a raft from a mattress frame, tied it with strips of bed linen, used a spoon as a paddle. He escaped. That's what they say. The guards found the empty frame, floating near the docks. No body, no footprints, just his name, scratched into the plaster of what used to be his dormitory wall. The others never left, and no one asked where they went, because the city didn't track the orphans. They tracked the budget. The children were numbers. And when a number disappeared, it was just subtracted. Some rooms had no beds, just buckets, and drains in the floor, one nurse wrote in her diary. We don't call them children anymore. We call them observations. That diary was confiscated. She was transferred and never seen again. You don't need war to create prisoners. You just need silence and paperwork. The buildings were labeled with soft names: the Sunrise Wing, the North Comfort Unit. But behind those doors were screams pressed into drywall, teeth marks on leather straps, and dreams that cracked from being held in too long. There were no photos, no news reports, no headlines. Because children don't vote, they don't sue, they don't testify, they just vanish. And the world keeps spinning. North Brother Island didn't lose its purpose. It evolved. From disease control to behavior control, from typhoid to defiance. And the scariest part, they called it progress. In the early 1970s, North Brother Island was officially abandoned, but not everything left. The city called it a transfer, said the facilities were outdated, said the program had run its course. But no records showed where the patients went. No forwarding addresses, no official deaths, just names that stopped showing up on rosters. And so the buildings were sealed, nature took over, vines wrapped around stairwells, trees split through concrete, birds nested where children once slept. But the island didn't forget. It became a sanctuary, not for people, but for herons, cormorants, peregrine falcons, and one man with binoculars. His name was Alan Morris, a conservationist, one of the first civilians allowed back on the island. Decades later, he came looking for nests, but he found something else. Beds still made, curtains drawn, a desk with open files, patient photos pinned to the wall, still there, undisturbed, as if the staff had just stepped out for lunch. The strangest part, one building, the children's ward, was warm, the floor swept, the bulb over the nurse's station still glowing, dim but unmistakably on. Alan never went back, but he never stopped watching his rearview mirror. The official report said he found nesting data, that's what they filed. But those who know him said he changed after that trip, stopped sleeping, stopped talking about birds. The past doesn't always decay, sometimes it waits. Tourists sometimes sneak onto the island, urban explorers, truth hunters. But they don't stay long. They report strange noises, coughing in empty rooms, footsteps with no origin, children crying, from trees that don't sway in the wind. One brought back video, grainy, shaky, almost useless. But frame by frame, in one window, a figure in white, standing perfectly still, facing the glass, head tilted, watching. The building was locked. From the inside, North Brother Island is abandoned. That's what they tell you. But something still lives there, something that remembers. Recovered files from North Brother Island tell a story, but not the one the city wanted you to hear. Patient rosters that don't match public records, names that appear without discharge dates, entries that end mid-sentence, like someone stopped writing, mid-thought, mid-breath. Some names repeat, same date of birth, different outcomes. One listed as discharged, the other as deceased. Same person, same file. Two endings, no explanation. It wasn't just clerical error. It was engineered confusion. The deeper researchers looked, the blurrier the island became. Records show people admitted for quarantine, but never recorded as leaving, not transferred, not released, not deceased, just nothing. And stamped over the missing lines, one phrase, all caps, case closed, no follow-up, no footnotes, just silence with official ink. One stack of files, found under a collapsed ceiling, revealed over 300 names, all unaccounted for. Some were infants, some were teenagers, some were elderly, but none of them should have disappeared, and still. The city says it was a hospital. Hospitals don't erase people. They don't lose children. They don't redact every mention of a ward, every staff memo, every expense receipt, unless what they were doing wasn't healthcare. One internal memo, recovered but heavily damaged, mentioned something called Category D, no definition, no description, just a list of initials and dates with no context. But each name on that list corresponded to a patient who had no recorded outcome. Gone, without trace, without closure. It's almost perfect, the erasure, but not perfect enough, because ghosts leave paperwork, even when people vanish. And now, you're starting to see the outline, the shape of something bigger, darker, systemic. Because this wasn't about one island, one hospital, one era. It was a prototype, a lab, not for medicine, but for control. And what they learned here didn't stay here. In the 1950s, North Brother Island changed its name, its purpose, its public face, but not its methods. They called it a Rehabilitation Center, said it was for addicts, said it was about recovery. healing, hope. But behind the new signs and the updated language, the same walls remained, the same straps, the same guards, the same silence. This wasn't rehab. It was restraint with better branding. Patients were forcibly confined, not for crimes, but for dependence, for behavior, for addiction without privilege. There were no counselors, just enforcers, no treatment plans, just protocols. You weren't helped. You were observed, sedated, and forgotten. Some were committed by families, some by police, others just disappeared from the streets. There was no due process, no release date. One room had no bed, no window, just a drain in the floor. They called it the reset chamber. No one came out the same. Inside, patients were subjected to experiments, withdrawal thresholds, sleep deprivation, forced detox without support, shock therapy as punishment, and those who broke were labeled unstable, discarded as failures of the process. The successes were the quiet ones, the ones who stopped asking, stopped moving, stopped needing anything at all. Those were the ones who got released, or so the records claim. But the files don't match the numbers, and the numbers don't match the names. Some files end with a stamp. Unclaimed remains. Those words say everything about how these people were viewed. Not lives, not stories, just remains. And unclaimed. Even now, those two words are used in hospitals across the country. When a patient dies alone, unwanted, unacknowledged, they become unclaimed. But what if they weren't alone? What if they were silenced? What if the system was designed to make sure no one came looking? This wasn't a hospital. It was a pressure chamber, a social delete button, dressed in white. And once you understand that, you start to see the pattern everywhere. By 1959, Riverside Hospital no longer functioned as a hospital because it didn't need to. The system had evolved. There were no press tours, no press at all, no oversight, no inspections. The state treated it like a black site, hidden in plain sight, mentioned in budgets, forgotten in headlines. Patients arrived, but no one expected them to leave. There were no celebrations, no success stories, just flickering lights and footsteps behind locked doors. The goal wasn't recovery, it was removal. Addicts weren't treated. They were detained, medicated into silence, stripped of identity, until even they couldn't remember who they were before. And the city, the same city that once cried about public health, now called it cost reduction. One less voice, one less burden, one less statistic. A survivor known only as MD later gave a testimony. He described being shocked for talking back. 3 times in 1 week, said he was locked in a storage closet. For 3 days, no food, no water, just the sound of himself breaking. He survived, but he never recovered. Another patient remembered hearing screams every night. When he asked a guard what it was, the guard smiled, said, "That's just detox." There was no outrage, because no one knew. And those who knew didn't speak, because speaking came with consequences. One doctor tried to file a whistleblower report. He was found drowned in calm waters, no wind, no waves, no reason, labeled accidental. Case closed. That phrase again, case closed. It's how the system seals its wounds, pretends it never bled. And North Brother Island became the quietest scar in the city's skin, but scars don't stay silent forever, especially when they were never healed, just hidden. This wasn't about drugs or disease or poverty. It was about who gets forgotten, And who gets to forget? It was about building a place where people could vanish legally and calling it mercy. And now you're starting to see how easy it is to disappear someone when the world's been trained not to look. Winter, 1963. A pipe burst. The power failed, and for the first time in decades, the island went silent, completely silent. In that blackout, someone died. How many, we'll never know. And the city made a decision not to repair, not to replace, not to investigate, but to erase. They evacuated the island in under 48 hours. No press, no coverage, no accountability. And when they left, they didn't take everything. The beds stayed, the files stayed, one child's drawing still pinned to the wall, a stick figure, frowning, standing behind bars, staff lit bonfires before leaving, burned documents, photos, tapes, names. A janitor tried to save a box of records. He never made it off the island, disappeared. One final ghost, added to the collection. A doctor who began writing a memoir, claimed children were injected with untested drugs, claimed staff were working with pharmaceutical reps, testing thresholds, side effects, control models. Before the book could be published, he died of a heart attack at age 41. No prior condition. The manuscript, stolen from his home, never recovered. FOIA requests return blank pages. City archives list the island as inactive. Medical files marked lost in transition. There are no documentaries, no official apologies, no memorials, just an island rotting in the middle of the river. Guarded, restricted, unexplained. They say a few survivors made it out, but none will talk. One, when asked in an interview, said only this: "They told us, you talk, you go back." He hasn't said a word since. The police boats still circle the shore. Trespassers arrested. No camping, no filming, no drones. Why guard a ruin if there's nothing left to hide? Unless something inside still breathes. You're not watching history. You're watching a pattern. And now, you're in it. You've heard the screams, felt the pattern, seen the blueprint behind the mask. But now comes the part they fear the most. You're starting to understand. North Brother Island wasn't just a place. It was a prototype, a training ground for silence, a proof of concept for institutional erasure. And the moment you recognize that, you stop being a civilian and start becoming a threat. This is the point where most men look away. Turn the video off. Tell themselves it's just history, just some ghost story in the fog, because if they don't look too long, they don't have to ask what else is built on the same design, what else is labeled safe, when it's actually a cage, what else has doors that only open one way, but not you. You stayed, you listened, you saw it. So now, say the phrase, say it out loud, type it in the comments. Carve it in your mind, twice. I do not consent. I do not consent. That's not for me. It's for you, a signal, to the algorithm, to the world, to yourself, that you're not one of them. Not a cog, not a number, not a compliant statistic waiting for sedation. You are awake, and once you say it, twice, you can't go back. The island isn't haunted. It's operational. Still in pieces, in policies, in forms you haven't signed but still live under. You've just scratched the surface, and the descent begins now. No more shadows, no more myths, only systems. Designed to erase without a sound. Welcome deeper. Now let's keep going. North Brother Island wasn't buried. It was replicated. Across oceans, across decades, under different names, and with better PR. The goal was never to destroy the blueprint. It was to refine it. They learned from the screams. the disappearances, the compliance, and they asked themselves a question. Why build islands at all? When you can build invisible ones, islands made of paperwork, islands made of algorithms, of diagnostics, of digital signatures, where you never have to lock a door because the patient never sees the cage. They called it progress. They moved from brick walls to policy walls, from straps to data. The new restraints don't rattle. They update your credit score, your health record, your employment file. Every system you touch now has the ability to flag you, sort you, silence you, not with force, but with friction. Slow, quiet friction that denies your loan, rejects your application, delays your results, deletes your appeal, and makes it all look normal. This is what North Brother taught them. Don't scream at people, just make them whisper. Don't kill the patient, just make them feel contagious. Let the public think it's for their safety, and you can build an empire of silence with smiling faces and perfect reviews. This is not paranoia. This is pattern recognition. The technology's new, but the method is old. Isolate the threat. Call it care. Erase the voice. Call it compliance. Redefine the human, until no one remembers what one looked like without chains. And the moment you realize this, you see the shape of the modern asylum. It's not on an island anymore. It's in the cloud, in your phone, in your file, in your feed. But the smell of North Brother still lingers, and it remembers what it taught them. Start digging into North Brother Island, and you'll find more than dust. You'll find names, institutions, contracts. You will find how silence was monetized, and suffering became scalable. The island was city-owned, yes, but the funding came from private hands, medical firms, pharmaceutical interests, university research grants. Names like Bellevue, Pfizer, Columbia, all appear in the city's archived ledgers. They weren't treating patients. They were testing models, not cures, but containment. How long could a person last in isolation? How do different drugs affect compliance? How do children react to institutional conditioning? It wasn't about health. It was about control. And once the data came in, they scaled it. What began as a quarantine hospital became a proof of concept for how to neutralize a population without bullets, without blood, without questions. And when the walls of North Brother crumbled, the data didn't. It was exported to other cities, other programs, other countries. Same scripts, different accents. Mental health facilities, rehab centers, youth reformatories. Rebranded, refinanced, reloaded. If you look into the U.S. Public Health Service during the 1940s, you'll find former North Brothers staff placed in key positions, designing policies, recommending protocols, writing handbooks still used today. What does that tell you? It tells you the island didn't close. It evolved, quietly, strategically. And it tells you this. The men who built North Brother didn't think they were evil. They thought they were smart. They didn't silence the unwanted out of cruelty. They did it out of efficiency. To them, a patient wasn't a person. It was a variable, an equation. And when the equation stopped solving, they deleted the line. If you think that mindset stayed on the island, you haven't been paying attention. It's in your systems, your cities, your laws. North Brother is the past, but it's also the plan. Still running, still refining. North Brother Island was a physical place, but the system it created, it was portable. They learned something powerful there. If you label it care, you can do anything. So they took the model and seeded it elsewhere. They started with schools, special education programs for the poor, the defiant, the misunderstood, separate rooms, padded walls, behavior charts, drug prescriptions by 3rd grade. Parents were told it was help, support, structure, but the language was recycled from North Brother files. Non-compliant, unfit for integration, observation required. Then came the juvenile facilities, reform schools, detention centers, residential learning environments. They had no teachers, just guards, no curriculum, just consequences. Boys locked in solitary for not eating, girls sedated for crying. One ward reported 47 hours straight of restraints and called it Standard Adjustment Protocol. But still, the public called it necessary. Then came the hospitals, the psych wards, the long-term care centers. New names, new paint, same script. Sedate first, ask later, or don't ask at all. Patients disappeared into paperwork. Families told they were transferred, but never told where. Everything sanitized, everything legal, everything approved. Because when you call it policy, it doesn't need to make sense, just needs to be followed. And when someone fights back, cries foul, calls it what it is, they're labeled paranoid, unstable, aggressive. They become the problem. And suddenly, they're the next file, in the next room, on the next island. This is the legacy of North Brother. It didn't create evil, it streamlined it, turned cruelty into protocol, isolation into procedure, silence into standard operating practice. And now, you don't need guards with guns. You just need a system and a reason, and you'll never run out of reasons. They didn't just study illness on North Brother Island. They studied obedience. They wanted to know. How much fear does it take to reshape a man? How many days in silence before he stops asking questions? And once they had the answer, they applied it. Everywhere, what they learned was simple. You don't need chains if a man builds his own. You don't need cages. If he starts to fear the exit, fear wasn't the punishment, it was the tool. The primer. They discovered that if you make someone believe they're already broken, they'll accept anything as treatment. Isolation becomes normal. Sedation becomes mercy. Restraints become routine. Soon, you don't have to threaten him. He polices himself. He lowers his voice, shrinks his presence, follows every step without being told. That's not rehabilitation. That's reprogramming. And it didn't end on that island, because when those patients left, if they ever did, they didn't return to freedom. They returned to systems built just like the one they left. They returned to parole, to clinics, to probation offices, to employers with questions, to neighbors with long memories. And so, the lesson stuck: comply or vanish. And slowly, that lesson reached the rest of the world now. It's in the workplace, in the school, in the grocery store, on the screen in your hand. Don't speak up. Don't ask why. Don't move too fast. Don't stand too tall. Because if you do, you'll be flagged, filed, forgotten. The system no longer needs to erase people. It just needs them to erase themselves, to step back, lower their tone, nod, and call it safety. But here's the question that breaks the pattern. What happens when a man remembers who he was before they taught him to behave? That's what they're afraid of. That's why they still guard the island. North Brother Island is gone, but its language survived. Listen carefully. You'll hear it everywhere. In news briefings, in health policies, in school reports. The phrases haven't changed. Only the volume. Non-compliant. Uncooperative subject. Patient refused treatment. deemed a danger to themselves or others. You've heard those words before. On the island, they were death sentences, now they're administrative codes. Excuses: to silence, to sedate, to disappear. Hospitals still use Code Gray to signal a behavioral threat. Translation: someone asking too many questions. In schools, they call it defiance disorder. They drug the bold, reward the passive, and say it's for their development. In workplaces, it's disciplinary review, violation of policy. Even when the policy was never explained, every institution has its own island, its own dock, its own quiet way of making people vanish. And you'll notice, the people, most often labeled, flagged, discarded, look the same: poor, loud, different, alone. The system doesn't erase strength. It erases inconvenient strength, the kind that won't bend, that won't apologize for existing. That's the legacy of North Brother. It trained the machine how to label rebellion as illness, how to pathologize independence, how to criminalize misalignment. And now, it doesn't need an island anymore. It can do it from an office, a laptop, a call center, and it will still tell you. It's for your safety every time you hear, "We're just following protocol." Understand what that really means. It means we turned our conscience off a long time ago. It means we've been trained to disappear people, politely. And the scariest part? Most of them don't even know they're doing it, because systems don't need evil men. They just need obedient ones. Some didn't comply. Not on North Brother, not in the psych wards, not in the classrooms, not in the rehab cells. Some stood up, spoke out, refused the needle, resisted sedation, demanded answers. And the system. It didn't scream. It didn't punish publicly. It just made them vanish. Quietly, efficiently. Alice Lang, a nurse who worked night shift in 1934, filed 3 internal complaints. One about restraints, one about expired medication, one about a child who went missing. Her letters were ignored. Then, she was transferred. 2 weeks later, she disappeared. No resignation letter, no forwarding address. Her locker was welded shut. Another staff member, Dr. Malcolm Reyes, tried to publish a paper about cognitive regression in isolated patients. He called it institutional collapse syndrome. 3 days before his journal submission, he drowned. No one could explain why a man who couldn't swim went canoeing alone at night. They called it a tragic accident. But you start to notice, all the accidents happen to the loud ones. It's not a new pattern. In every system built on control, there's a quiet ledger of people who resisted and vanished, whistleblowers fired, truth-tellers discredited, survivors labeled unstable. It's a clean process, surgical, untraceable, because the system doesn't need to destroy your body if it can erase your credibility, call you delusional, call you bitter, call you broken. They used to do it with straitjackets. Now they do it with press releases. They'll say, "She was under stress. He had a history of instability. They were dealing with personal issues." And just like that, you're no longer a person, you're a problem, filed under, resolved. But here's the truth. If they're not afraid of what you're saying, they don't bother erasing you. So when you see a man lose everything for telling the truth, understand, he struck a nerve, and the machine bled. The end came fast. Winter, 1963. A pipe burst, the power failed, and the institution lost control of its mask. For the first time, there was no hum of fluorescent lights, no guards making rounds, no sedatives being pushed at 3 a.m. just silence. Someone died that night, maybe more, and the city made its final decision. Don't fix it, don't report it, erase it. Within 48 hours, the order came down. Evacuate, but not like you're saving anyone, like you're covering a crime scene. Patients were removed under heavy supervision. Files were boxed, beds stripped, hallways scrubbed. Only some of it made it out, and what didn't was destroyed. On the third night, a bonfire was lit behind the intake ward. Photos, reports, tapes, X-rays, drawings, all thrown into the flames. Smoke rose above the trees, and the staff didn't ask questions. A janitor named Ellis tried to take a box home. He said it had names, children's names, discharge dates that didn't match death records. He never made it to the ferry. Disappeared between the ward and the dock. No alarm, no investigation. His punch card still hangs on the time clock. Unpunched, a doctor, Arthur Lowell, left behind a journal. Handwritten, hidden inside a supply cabinet. It detailed drug trials on orphans, side deals with pharmaceutical reps, the use of electroshock for compliance conditioning. The journal made it off the island, but Lowell didn't. Heart attack, age 41. No medical history, cause of death listed as natural. The journal, stolen from his widow's home 2 weeks later. No break-in, no fingerprints, just gone. Before the last staff boarded the ferry, someone locked the children's ward from the inside. To this day, no one has the key. And still, lights flicker there. Curtains stay drawn. The floor is swept, as if someone is still waiting. North Brother didn't die. It was archived, and what it left behind is watching, waiting, remembering. You think the island's gone? You're wrong. It just learned how to hide better. North Brother isn't made of brick anymore. It's made of pixels, biometrics, user agreements, invisible checkboxes. You never knew you clicked. The modern asylum is digital, and you're already in it. It begins with tracking. They say it's for health, for safety, for personalization, but it's monitoring, profiling, and adjusting. Every search you make, every question you ask, every delay in response is recorded. You're not a person, you're a behavioral profile. And if the profile doesn't match expectations, the system intervenes, not with alarms, but with inconveniences. You get flagged, shadow banned, removed from trusted status. Maybe your messages stop sending. Maybe your files disappear. Maybe the system locks you out and says, there was a problem verifying your identity. That's digital quarantine, but it doesn't stop there. Your health data, now stored in cloud databases, shared across networks, scored, predicted, sold. Insurance companies use it. Employers use it. Governments use it. Not to heal you, but to pre-categorize you. High risk, low compliance, potential threat. They'll say it's automated, that no one is watching, that it's just a precaution. But someone wrote that code. Someone decided that certain words, certain symptoms, certain histories deserve silence. And once flagged, you're not detained physically, you're just nudged, slowly, toward digital isolation. Your voice carries less. Your reach gets cut. You start getting ignored. And like North Brother, no one ever tells you the rules. No one explains the decision. No one signs their name. You're just gone. Still alive, still breathing, but functionally invisible. That's not fiction. That's now. The system doesn't need to fear resistance, because most people will never notice it started, but you did. And now it sees you too. The deepest wound North Brother left wasn't physical, it was psychological. Because what the system learned was how to erase identity without touching the body. They didn't need bullets or blood. They needed repetition, silence, and time. Here's how it worked. First, they stripped your name, gave you a number, something impersonal, clinical, easier to file. Then, they took your voice, restricted letters, filtered calls, told your family you were under observation. Now you're isolated, not just physically, but narratively. No one hears your side. No one remembers what you sounded like. No one asks. Then, they changed your label from patient to problem, from man to case, from mother to carrier, from child to ward. Once the label sticks, they don't have to justify anything. Then comes the final step, make you doubt yourself. You say you're innocent. They say you're in denial. You ask questions. They write down paranoia. You refuse treatment. They increase the dosage, and slowly, you forget who you were. You start repeating their phrases, living by their schedule, dreaming in institutional white. And when the time comes to leave, if it ever comes, you're not the same man who arrived. You're quieter, numb, grateful for permission, conditioned. That's what they wanted, because an erased man doesn't resist. He complies, he blends, he watches others fall, and says nothing. That method didn't die with the island. It was perfected. Now it happens in rehab centers, in detention facilities, in psychiatric evaluations, in job performance reports, in algorithmic behavior scores. The tactics are cleaner, the chains invisible, but the result is the same. A man who no longer remembers what freedom ever felt like, and the scariest part, he doesn't even realize he's gone. Not everything was destroyed. A few records, a few photos, slipped through the cracks. Not because someone saved them, but because the system overlooked them. A file box, misplaced in an off-site archive, recovered by a city intern in 1978. Inside were documents labeled RBI, Phase 3 Observational Study, not for public disclosure. They weren't about typhoid or tuberculosis or addiction. They were about behavior. Charts measuring response times to isolation, sleep patterns after sedative withdrawal, aggression levels in adolescence placed in solitary emotional collapse timelines under sensory deprivation. This wasn't treatment, it was data extraction. Pages marked, subject unresponsive, terminated protocol. Crossed out names, handwritten notes about containment effectiveness. One folder listed 23 children, age range 6 to 14. None of them had contagious disease, each labeled control variable, social defiance. There were photos too, black and white, grainy, children staring into the lens, eyes wide, blank. One boy with a number stitched into his collar, 43. Same number scratched into a bedpost in the abandoned ward. The photos had dates, but no exit records. Another report referenced E-module testing, conducted in Ward B, described as exposure to persistent negative stimuli over 96-hour cycles. In simpler terms, they were breaking people, on purpose, to see how long it took, and all of it was funded. Signatures at the bottom from corporate research divisions, universities, private medical contractors, some of the same names, now found in modern pharmaceutical patents, clinical trial sponsors, and behavioral intervention firms. The island wasn't just a dumping ground, it was a lab, and the patients were subjects, human variables in a long-running experiment. You weren't supposed to see this, because if you do, you understand. They weren't healing anyone. They were measuring thresholds. Our thresholds. What makes you compliant? What makes you break? And how far they can go. Before you stop resisting, the real virus was never disease, it was submission. And the island was just the incubator. After the evacuation, North Brother Island should have faded into history, another forgotten facility, another relic of a less civilized time, but it didn't. Because even now, over 60 years later, it's still under surveillance. No entry, no camping, no photography, no drone footage, no press. Why guard a ruin unless the ruin still matters? In 1975, the city designated the island a bird sanctuary. They claimed it was ecologically sensitive, a paradise for herons and cormorants, a refuge for wildlife. But the buildings were never demolished, the records never made public, the perimeter never left unpatrolled. Local fishermen report seeing flashlights in the halls. Tourists who sneak in hear coughing from empty rooms, metal dragging, children crying through the trees. Urban explorers have gone missing. 3 in the last 15 years. Search efforts ended within 48 hours. No bodies recovered. No press coverage. Satellite images show anomalies. Heat signatures in the children's ward. Power lines where there should be none. Doors that stay closed. From the inside. In 2017, a filmmaker uploaded drone footage to YouTube, showed a light bulb on, curtains drawn, a shadow in the window. The video was taken down within 24 hours. His channel deleted, his hard drives confiscated. His last message read, "There's someone still in there." Ask New York City for maps. You'll find the island blurred. Ask for documentation. They'll redirect you to inactive archives. Even Google won't show you certain angles. Why? Because the island isn't dead. It's sleeping. And like all things that sleep, it can wake. If it were just ghosts, the city wouldn't care. But it's not ghosts they're hiding. It's truth. Truth about what was done, what was learned, and how that knowledge was deployed elsewhere. North Brother is a closed chapter, only because they stapled the pages shut, not because the story ended. There's no plaque, no memorial, no apology. Because if you admit what happened, you're admitting the method still works, and you risk people asking where the next island is. This was never just a story. It was a schematic, a warning, a blueprint of how a system erases without leaving blood on its hands. North Brother Island was the prototype, a controlled environment, a test site for policies they could scale. It succeeded. The data was harvested, the methods refined, and now? You don't need an island. You just need a screen, an app, a list of red flags, and a reason: mental health evaluation, public safety, unusual behavior, non-normative activity. You've seen it. You just didn't recognize the mask. They learned from North Brother that you don't have to kill a man to erase him. Just isolate him, invalidate him, catalog him, then forget him. Today, it's done with algorithms, case managers, predictive analytics, behavioral scoring. They call it social wellness, civic safety, proactive care. But underneath, it's the same logic. Silence the non-compliant, medicate the resistant, flag the different, contain the aware, look around, ask the wrong question online. You get a warning, a strike, a shadow. Speak too boldly at work. You're reviewed, reassigned, vanished. Push back on a diagnosis. You're labeled unstable, treated as hostile, stripped of rights. And the more you resist, the more help they assign you. That's not healing. That's management. And like North Brother, they'll smile while they lock the doors. This system doesn't care if you're innocent, only if you're obedient, because obedience isn't a choice anymore. It's a score, and your score determines everything: access, freedom, visibility, existence. The island wasn't shut down. It was digitized, streamlined, distributed. And now? It's everywhere. In your city, in your workplace, in your clinic, in your feed. You don't need guards. You just need a policy. You don't need a locked ward. You just need enough people to stop asking questions. So ask yourself, when they come for you, will anyone even know you were here? You've made it this far. That means something. Most people don't. Most turn away, get uncomfortable, click out, fall back asleep. But not you. You're still here, still listening, still feeling it. Because something in this story wasn't just information, it was recognition. You saw yourself in the silence, in the system, in the forgotten, maybe not locked in a ward, but buried under expectation, protocol, obligation, numbness. That's their new strategy. Make you erase yourself quietly, willingly, efficiently. But something in you resisted. Even now, you feel it. The tension in your chest, the clarity in your gut, the part of you that says, "This ends with me." Good. Now act on it. Say the words out loud, in the comments, in your mirror, in your bones, twice, for signal, for memory, for reclamation. I remember my name. I remember my name. Type it, say it, engrave it. Because that phrase is more than words. It's code, it's defiance, it's a system error. They can label you, flag you, profile you. But the moment you remember who you are, you break the loop. You stop being a subject. You become a signal, a reminder to others that they're not alone, that someone else woke up and didn't go back to sleep. It doesn't make you safe. It makes you dangerous. Because now you see how deep the cage goes, how wide the program runs, and more importantly, you see where the cracks are. Keep going. And if they watch this, if the ones behind the curtain are listening, good, let them, because we're done being quiet. This was never just about North Brother Island. It was about the operating system behind the mask, the machine beneath the medicine, the architecture of control that no one wants to admit. Still breathes, they say. History repeats. But that's a lie. History is a pattern, a system that updates itself, learns, adapts, refines. It doesn't repeat. It evolves. North Brother was a prototype. Waco was a test. Guantanamo was an upgrade. Social scoring is rollout. What you're standing inside now is the full release. And while you've been taught to see freedom, what you're really living in is polished containment, invisible rails, invisible rules, and a countdown you didn't start, but you're still responsible for. Here's the truth. You were born into a system that doesn't need your permission, only your participation. It will take your labor, your data, your silence, and call it freedom. It will take your strength, your time, your attention, and call it productivity. It will take your soul and call it a fair trade, but only if you let it. Because here's what the island couldn't kill. Choice. The choice to look deeper, to remember, to rebuild yourself from beneath the programming, to become immune, not to disease, but to the illusion. Not everyone's ready for that. Most will scroll on, forget, numb out, laugh it off. But you're still here, still feeling it. Good. Because here's your final question. Now that you've seen the blueprint, what are you going to do with it? Answer carefully. Because once you know, you can't unknow. Once you see, you can't unsee. And once you wake up, you'll never fit in again, ever. Welcome to the fracture. You've just remembered your name. Now act like it.